Hey, everybody, it's Natalie Bencivenga. Welcome to Facts Over Fear, Lunchtime Health News Edition with one of my absolute favorite people in the whole wide world, Dr. Natalie Gentile. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me again, Natalie. Good to be here.
Oh, always. You know, I was thinking about the topics I wanted to touch on today, and I feel like the things we're going to discuss all sort of cross over into one larger question, which is who gets to decide what's best for mothers, mental health, and our babies? And there seems to be sort of a connection of thread here around when authority is important and when it's parents' choice and why that's problematic. So, are Americans really reclaiming autonomy over health decisions, or are we entering an era where the mistrust of institutions is reshaping medicine, pregnancy, and parenting itself in real time? Today, we're going to be talking about the new moms.gov website that the HHS has put up, which is on its surface, perhaps support for mothers. But when you really start to scratch the surface, you see a lot of anti-abortion rhetoric and actually a lot of things that are harmful to expectant parents or mothers themselves. Then we're going to be discussing about the war on antidepressants. Are Americans actually over-medicated, or are life-saving treatments becoming political targets? And then just to round out the sun, to just bring it home, we're going to discuss what's going on with some parents rejecting vitamin K shots. What does medical freedom actually mean, especially when it collides with preventable tragedy? So we're keeping it light today on Facts Over Fear, per usual. So let's just dive right in, Dr. G. So for the first story that I touched on, moms.gov, the federal government just launched this website, moms.gov, which is being marketed as a one-stop resource for expectant and new mothers, which on the surface, I think there's nothing wrong with that, right? So supporters are saying this is just overdue help for families. But of course, we've got critics that are arguing it's leaving out key reproductive health information and could reshape what maternal support even means in the United States. The reason I wanted to kick this one off today was because you did a video really talking about what the actual marketing looks like for this website and how sinister some of the overtones were. So could you share a little bit about that?
If you're referring to my video about the nutrition recommendations that were on here, so I thought it was really interesting. It was National Women's Health Week, and this is ironically during Mental Health Awareness Month, but Women's Health Week, and the FDA puts out this story that's like, thank goodness we have these nutrition, recommendations and guidelines, and guess what? We're slapping a label onto food to tell you if it's healthy or not. And I just thought I was like, I've got to look into this further. So I check out this website, and it's talking about labeling foods as healthy or not, as if women needed any more reminders about morality around food, as if women, who are the primary people making food decisions in households, making healthcare decisions in households, needed another reminder of the good versus bad mentality around food, when what we really need help with is access to food.
Yeah.
Is food that's affordable, right? And I think that's where time and again, the common thread here is this administration is missing the mark on the actual needs of the people and making really pretty websites, and slapping labels on things. I just think we're misallotting resources here. And I find that very concerning.
I totally agree with that, especially when we're looking at what they were doing to expectant mothers just a few months back. It feels like so many years ago. But when they were talking about how you shouldn't be taking Tylenol and really trying to shame people, there's just a lot of shame around pregnancy and around these concepts. What else was interesting to me, Dr. G, from an ethical perspective, they talk about having Trump accounts for babies. Yeah. As well as Trump RX. Yes. So like Donald Trump's own prescription platform, which wasn't clear that this was a government-owned entity, but rather, is this a conflict of interest for him, one of many, where he would be possibly profiting off of, prescription meds? Can you talk a little bit about that situation?
Well, this is also in the same time frame of Dr. Oz saying that I think it was 1 in 3 Americans are underbabied, which, aside from the fact that that's one of the creepiest statements and words I've heard in a long time.
Wow. Yeah.
I mean, so there's that. There was
Mhm.
also discussion during that interview about Trump babies and that we'll have more Trump babies. Now, I don't think Trump is fertile nor impregnating all of these women to make these babies. So there's this kind of push for babying, right? For
Mm.
people, for women
Mhm.
to
Mhm.
create more human beings. And so the goal on this moms.gov website talking about the Trump RX, from my understanding from reading through it, is these
Mhm.
are fertility meds that you'll have better access to.
Wow.
Okay. So more fertility meds, more support for IVF. As someone who has many, many friends going through
Sure.
infertility and IVF, big fan. Hey,
Yeah.
like, let's help people who want to have more children. Great. I think where I get real concerned is
Mhm.
when the government is pushing for more babies. It's not like, oh, you want to have a baby, let me help and assist with that. There's an undertone of calling Americans underbabied and viewing that as a problem of our, national security, viewing that as a problem. Sovereignty is where it crosses a line.
Yeah.
And that's what this website is giving for sure. And then, like you said, conflict of interest, which, by the
Mhm.
way, the Trump RX website is not giving you cost savings. If you actually look through and compare a lot of those
I'm
prices, these
shocked.
meds were already generic, cheap as can be, but he's slapping brand label meds on there and saying that he's getting them for cheaper. So I think it's like it's all a big marketing ploy, and it's causing confusion for people that are already, really trying to weed through a lot of marketing and misinformation.
I think one of the most disturbing parts of this whole website experience was the Instagram reels that were being pushed out with these sort of very handmaid tale mothers or women
Oh,
talking about motherhood and these women in positions of power within HHS. And critics are arguing that this federal platform, moms.gov, is advancing, to your point, Dr. G, an ideological pronatalist agenda, and more so, is also providing misleading information by directing users to crisis pregnancy centers, which we know are not what's the word I'm looking for? They're not accredited to be able to take care of women or birthing people
mhm.
deciding if and how to plan for a family. To the point where the National Women's Law Center and other legal experts are further contending that the site prioritizes partisan framing over comprehensive evidence-based healthcare and is failing to address broader systems like paid leave, universal care, healthcare, universal childcare,
Mhm.
education, all of the things, clean air, clean water, all the things, access,
Mhm.
expansion of SNAP benefits, all of these things that would actually
Yeah.
make expectant mothers in particular healthier and hopefully deliver healthy babies. What do you make of
Yeah.
all of that? Because I appreciated your commentary about sort of the tone of all of this on your social as well.
Yeah, I so that, in particular was a post that was made on Mother's Day that came out through HHS with what I can only assume was an AI robot, but is apparently a real individual woman who exists. It was truly
The one
truly
time it
disturbing.
wasn't AI.
Yeah, exactly. The one time you wished it was AI. That's what this was. And
Mm.
all joking aside, like, this
Yeah.
woman, appears to have been coerced into, kind of speaking robotically about how the Trump administration and HHS are working so hard to help women and working so hard to advance, women as, like, the backbone of our society, which no arguments from me. Like, women are the backbone of our
Listen.
society, and we should take care of women. But what was fascinating was she starts talking about how in other countries and other quarters of the world, there are women who, are essentially putting labor and not giving birth labor, but, like, work
Mhm.
labor and
Mhm.
workforce, as a priority ahead of rearing families.
Mm.
And again, this comes back to, like, women should be barefoot and pregnant in the kitchen. That's our only role, and pumping out babies. And if that's for you, beautiful, go for it. But I
Right.
don't think that should be coming from our government as a, decry for everyone to be following. The other thing I found fascinating on this website was it links to federally qualified healthcare centers. I thought, "What?"
Mm.
Because interestingly, FQHCs are being gutted from a, grant funding perspective, and also FQHCs are taking care of large amounts of immigrant populations. If you look at those in the city of Pittsburgh, for example, we've got
Wow.
lots of immigrant populations that rely on FQHCs, especially now that people cannot afford insurance or actually are afraid to engage because they're afraid of ice and
Can
repercussions.
can you explain what an FQHC is for
Yes.
people
So
that might not
federally
know?
qualified health centers are getting grant funding, are getting funding
Mhm.
from the government to provide health care. They can do things like sliding scales, for example,
Mhm.
to help
Mhm.
people who can't afford health care. Uninsured patients can go there and receive care along these sliding scales. So these are people who really are not actively able to opt to access maybe the healthcare system that we typically
Right.
see in the big hospitals and institutions, and they're crucial to our communities. But why is this on that website? I
Mm.
think it's fantastic, but why is this on that website when the government is actively dismantling these places? And I still can't wrap my head around that. I was hoping you could.
Yeah, I think it's bait and switch. I mean, this is what they do. They want you to think it's a misalignment of both, ethics and information, but it allows them to double talk. And that's literally all this it's the same thing with everything they're doing. We want a healthy America, but we're going to cut XYZ. We're pushing towards a clean environment, but we're stripping the EPA. They're just saying words,
Yeah.
Dr. G, and they have no basis in reality. But the problem is because of our fragmented sort of media ecosystem, which is why I think these conversations are so important. And please share and follow us along if you're joining us for this, because we need to be putting out proper information, in particular around public health. And so it isn't surprising to me at all that, because when I looked at this moms.gov website at first glance, and you know me, I'm going in with a skeptic face.
Yeah.
I was like,
Same.
oh, this isn't what I thought. And then as I scrolled, I was like, okay, here we go. This is
But
why
that takes
people
a
are,
discerning eye, right? And so the
yes,
layperson who is freaking the F out because they're
yes,
paying almost $5 a gallon on gas and
ooh,
are working multiple jobs and are choosing between, their rent and their insulin and their health care,
yes,
et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, is not going to sit
no,
and be
they
like, well, let
can't.
me let me understand what the background of all this
No,
is and they're not. And they
no.
can't. And that
And
is
they
no
don't
fault of
have
theirs.
time.
They don't have time.
Right. So I just want to pivot here because we've got two more topics, but I think this one really dovetails well because to your point, they're talking about supporting quote unquote the mother. Well, a lot of mothers prenatal, before they have babies, before they ever decide to have babies, and then postpartum deal with mental health issues just like anyone in the general population. And what's going on right now is there is this quiet war on antidepressants beginning to blossom here. Are Americans over-medicated, or are life-saving treatments becoming political targets? I think this is fascinating because of how it plays into maternal health, because a growing movement under RFK Jr.'s direction is challenging antidepressants and pushing deprescribing. Now, advocates say mental health treatment relies too heavily on medication. Critics warn broad skepticism toward SSRIs could discourage people from treatments that reduce suicide and depression risk.
Mhm.
I got to say, Dr. G, back in the day, I have my MSW and I worked as a mental health professional. I worked with mostly kids. And it wasn't, in my opinion, at the time. I know there had been, I think, a place where kids were just sort of being given scripts for everything. But by the time I got into the field, there was a lot more discernment of what is going on. Let's look at diet, physical activity, what's going on in the home, how's the
Yeah.
school. Like there was a lot more holistic wraparound services provided. And I know you as a physician, you always are thinking outside the box in terms of like, how can we reduce the number of medications
Yes.
that a person might need to be on? But what you've always said clearly is, medication when indicated, like
Mhm.
when needed. And so
Yes.
once again, this top-down messaging of suggesting that the Health and Human Service Department under RFK just knows that everyone is under-medicated, to
Mhm.
me sets up a very dangerous situation where people aren't going to seek help, where they're not going to question their mental health challenges because they're going to be
Mhm.
afraid of being stigmatized if they
Yep.
are on something. It's giving eugenics is what
Yeah.
I'm getting at.
Yeah, so, I mean, just some background, like, no one's a bigger fan of deprescribing than I.
Yeah.
I love deprescribing, I love looking holistically at management options. I also am somebody who was suicidal not once, but twice with my
Mm.
pregnancies, severe antepartum and postpartum depression and anxiety. I mean, so I've kind of been on many sides of this, and I also work in primary care where I see a very fragmented healthcare system and primary care system where you are seeing a different person each time.
Yeah.
I always call it the Halloween trick or treat bag of medications because you're
Mm,
just trick or treating from doctor to doctor, by no fault of the patient's own. You just acquire different diagnoses and medications place to place, and nobody is sitting and looking and saying, well, why are you on this? Supplements, medications, all of it. So I do a ton of sitting and saying, why are you still on an SSRI? Do we still need it? Is this actually helping you anymore? Is this a different chapter in life? I am not arguing
mhm,
that we need to be assessing this, right? Like
100%.
any medication, not just SSRIs. But I am arguing that we cannot out lifestyle, out exercise, out, eat depression, anxiety that requires a medication. There
Mm,
is a point in many people's lives where a pharmaceutical intervention may save their life.
yeah.
And if we stigmatize this so much that a patient then decides not to seek care, we are going to lose people. And that's really scary. I was one of those people that could have been lost, so I take this
Mm,
very seriously. And we see this in everything. Let's talk about, the world of obesity management, weight stigma. We see the same parallel. This administration with a ton of shaming around patients in larger bodies. If we
yes.
stigmatize enough, these patients aren't going to seek healthcare. It's a common thread. They're just picking a different target this month. I'm sure we'll find another one next month. And it's really sad because frankly, it gives those of us in the lifestyle medicine world a bad name if you're
Mhm.
really paying close enough attention because it makes it look like it's either lifestyle or pharmaceutical and medical intervention when in reality it's an amalgam of the two.
And what's fascinating to me is, like, we're not doing that for, like, a heart issue.
Or
Like,
diabetes.
right, it's like, you change your diet, you change your lifestyle, cool, maybe now you don't have to be on that cholesterol medicine, or maybe you still do. And it's like there's not a stigma as much around something like that, but I do find it interesting that they are going after mental health, and I do find it fascinating that they're talking once again about the importance of mothers and motherhood, but then at the same time shaming and villainizing people that are trying to seek mental health support. And what I find fascinating about all of this is we haven't had that long of a dialogue where it's been okay to talk about your mental health.
Yeah.
Like this whole everybody's on something or everybody has a therapist and their therapist is a therapist. This is a
Mhm.
fairly new sort of conversation
Yes.
that a lot of people are still having. And so if they want to talk about anti-depression and anti-anxiety, maybe they should start with universal basic income because I remember being in that world. A lot of depression and anxiety was correlated and related to poverty because they
Yes.
could not pay their bills. I would be depressed too. Like, I
Yep.
think sometimes we don't acknowledge the systemic weight that is on so many individuals. And by the time they're able to find you or someone like you that is willing to listen, they've kicked that can so far down the road that they
Yeah.
do need medical intervention in the form of a prescription. And there's nothing wrong with that.
And frankly, I'm seeing it across the board regardless of income at this point.
Oh, hell yeah.
Like I'm seeing people in any industry, very much in my own industry of healthcare, people
Yep.
who are under crushing mental health,
Ooh,
the weight of mental health, regardless of income, because you can't necessarily afford your way out of the disaster of our crumbling economy,
yep.
the disaster of our crumbling healthcare system. And that's scary.
Mhm.
That's scary,
Yeah,
right? Like,
people are
we're all going
scared.
down. People are
Yeah,
scared. Yeah.
yeah, and I just think it's an important footnote that, I think we talk a little bit too much, and from that, I mean, this government's perspective, once again, everything is about the individual, but
Yes.
once again, they refuse to look at the systems that are perhaps putting that added weight, heavy weight on people, like you said, where it's now impacting all socioeconomic classes, which to me is a very big indicator that we're going down the very, very worst path that we can.
Well,
And
I think it's interesting in the messaging from this administration that, what's your fault versus what's not your fault. And there's a
mhm,
lot more in their bucket of what's your fault, you, the
right.
individual, versus what's not. And when, again, that parallel to like in the age of GLP-1s coming out and the opportunity to get everybody into the skinny body that this
Mm,
administration wants you to look like, all of a sudden they'll acknowledge that weight's a physiologic problem. Isn't that fascinating?
Isn't that
Now that
interesting?
we have something, that's a physiological problem, but mental health disorders are not.
Mm.
I mean,
Yeah,
we have
your
how many
brain
years of
just
data?
floats
Yeah,
away from your body.
exactly, and it's your fault. So bring it back in like a
Right,
balloon. Like
right.
I just find that an interesting example there.
No, I think that's a totally important acknowledgement, which is why you're not just a pretty face, you
Thank
know?
you. Thank you
Yeah.
so much.
hmm if you're just joining me and Dr. G, who's not just a pretty face, we are talking about some of the most discussed and important healthcare topics of the week. If you joined late, don't worry. I'm going to be posting this to Substack later today and onto YouTube soon. I want to round things up with this issue around whose fault is it, as we're talking about new parents, because there's so much pressure on a new parent, right? You want to do everything right. I truly believe 99.9% of parents really are just trying to do the very best they can and want the very best for their child. Unfortunately, because of the level of disinformation and propaganda we have flying around in the ether and sort of this fractured, digital media scene, it's hard to understand what you should be listening to and what you should be believing. And unfortunately, these things are now having dire consequences. Parents are rejecting vitamin K shots. And when we look at medical freedom, we have to recognize also how that individual responsibility plays into the idea of freedom. More parents are refusing newborn vitamin K shots, a decades old intervention that dramatically reduces life threatening bleeding. Refusal rates have risen. Doctors say they're seeing preventable emergencies that were once very rare becoming much more commonplace. Infants without the shot, now wait for this, you guys, I didn't know it was this extreme. Infants without the vitamin K shot are estimated to be 81 times more likely to develop dangerous bleeding disorders. That's monumental. Dr. G, as a physician that works with babies all the way up to the elderly as a primary care physician, when you saw what was going on here, what did you immediately think to yourself, well, this is what people are missing or need to understand about these vitamin K shots?
Mhm. So with the vitamin K shots, this is not an immunization. This isn't a vaccine. So I think that's the first and foremost thing to understand. The second thing to understand here is when you have people in the anti-vax world, right? Or the
Mhm.
people who are questioning, and it's okay to have questions and concerns.
Sure.
They're worried, why are you putting something into my child that they could form their own immunity to, that they could kind of get infected and be okay? Vast majority of the population, they have that argument. With the vitamin K shot, your baby's coming out of the womb without vitamin K appropriate enough to help them clot. Okay.
Hmm.
And you need to be able to clot so you don't bleed to death, to
Wow.
be very frank. So we're talking about giving babies something that they don't have. This is a whole different argument. And I think it's important because a lot of people see a needle. They think needle, jab into my precious little newborn thing that I just carried and I just delivered. And I understand that. Trust me, we're talking two different things here.
Yeah.
And so that's what I really would love for a
Mm.
takeaway for people to realize. We're not talking about vaccines here. We're talking about giving your baby a potentially life-saving intervention at birth that we have had around for decades upon decades at this point.
It's really sad to me because sometimes I think medicine worked too well.
Yeah.
Where it's like, and I've used this, excuse me, I've used this example when talking about vaccines. Like, they work so well, we don't know what polio really looks like anymore. We don't really know what some of these really horrific diseases that use vaccines are there for. But since we've had all of that anti-vax information, it's made people question everything that their doctors recommend when they have children. And so it's spilled over, like you said, into a space where vitamin K is not a vaccine, it's a vitamin, and it can save your baby's life. And it breaks my heart that we're at this place in our society where we've dismantled every single level of trust between ourselves and institutions. And I get how that sort of started, from this perspective of not feeling heard, not just with medicine, with literally every institution, because I would put journalism in that category as well. The over gatekeeping of information, of understanding. But one of those things where you're like, oh, I've never heard of this vitamin K thing. What is this? And then the panic setting in. So as we're moving forward, how do we work on improving trust between public and public health officials, between public and people like yourself, primary care doctors? Because you guys really, to me, are so undervalued in the medical world. You have to kind of know everything, and you have to do it in a way that makes it easy for people to access you at any point, which is
Yep.
a real challenge. And I don't think you always get your flowers. Can you talk a little bit about how we can sort of bridge these gaps and what people can do to find a way forward here, so we can create a healthier tomorrow for our families and our friends?
Yeah, I mean, what I'm gonna say is gonna sound like a big ask, but it's really a call to action to my colleagues. So
Mm,
I see the repair of trust between the general public and the healthcare world to be coming from the docs, from the healthcare
mm,
providers themselves, from the healthcare workers, banding together. So I see it as two-pronged. We're so much siloed from each other, which is how the system then keeps us apart. And if you can keep us apart, then you can get us angrier and angrier, but
that's right.
weaker and more tired. And the
Mm,
more exhausted we are, it doesn't matter how angry we are, we're not going to be able to fight against the system. So, that's a push for collective bargaining. That's a push for discussions around unionization. That's a push for discussions around how people
mm-hmm.
can work together in the healthcare field to fight back against the healthcare institutions that are slowly, actually rapidly at this point, dismantling their well-being and
Yeah.
ability to provide proper care. The other prong is for us to then go out into the community. And I think the
Mm-hmm.
more of those of us on social media talking, the more of us docs doing community education, the more of us being a face that's familiar is going to hopefully drown out and flood the feed
Yeah.
uh, in a way that we become the familiar faces that are more approachable, as opposed to the influencers trying to sell you something, as opposed to the people that are talking heads with no actual background or understanding or scientific knowledge around evidence-based medicine. So it's a big ask,
Mm.
colleagues that are listening. But even if you don't have it in you, tell us, those who are shouting from the rooftops, what needs to be said.
Yeah.
Because we're going to do as best we can to try and rebuild that trust.
You guys, just when I can't, like when I think I can't love Dr. G more, she starts talking about unionizing. And I'm
I knew
like, oh,
that's how I knew I was gonna get you.
new level, new level unlocked, everybody. Just saying. Love it. No, I so appreciate everything that you shared, Dr. G, especially that part, because I do think there is a responsibility on the side of the physician for sure. But I will add, it's also up to the public. I know we're exhausted and I know we're completely overwrought. But once again, people are talking about these issues in a way that is evidence backed and based in science and reason and logic. And there are people out there that are trying to be of support to these spaces. So make sure you're trying to seek out that kind of information and do a little digging yourself. If something sounds a little too good to be true, or if it's really just always reflecting back your own worldview, examine that, because I do a lot of media literacy around these topics, and I try to explain the why and how. As it pertains to becoming your own independent journalistic source. Not that you have to do that, but using those critical thinking skills that you've had, and start applying them, because this is your life and this is your community and we all matter. And so we all deserve good, trustworthy information. And I know I can vet for Dr. G that she is a pillar of that. And that's why I continue to platform and support her incredible work. And speaking of incredible work, if people want to learn more about you and follow along, so that they can continue to see all of the things that you are uplifting, where can they go?
Thank you. So I'm very active on many platforms at Natalie Gentile MD on Substack, YouTube, my website by that same name, and definitely Instagram as well.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Dr. G. And until next time, everyone, take care of yourselves and each other. Bye,
Thanks,
everybody.
Natalie.